Tonight, the race for New York Congressional District 17. Republican Congressman Mike Lawler and Democratic challenger Mondaire Jones facing off, speaking directly to the more than 770,000 people in Rockland, Putnam, and parts of Westchester and Dutchess counties. It is one of the nation's most competitive races, and it could help decide the balance of power and control of the House. Election Day is less than 2 weeks away. Live and uninterrupted from the CBS Broadcast Center, the debate for New York's 17th District starts right now. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on New York 55 and streaming on CBS New York. I'm Maurice Dubois. I am joined by political reporter Marcia Kramer. We want to thank the candidates for being here, Democrat Mondaire Jones and Republican Congressman Mike Lawler. And first here, we want to go over the rules for tonight. The candidates will have 1 minute to answer each questions with time for rebuttals when necessary. And we do ask that you please be respectful of the time limits. And with that, let's get right to it. Mr. Lawler, we're going to start with you here. John Kelly, the four-star general and former President Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, is raising serious questions about Donald Trump's fitness for office. This week, he said that Trump believed Hitler said good things, and Kelly said Trump would rule like a dictator and meets the definition of a fascist. Your reaction, sir? Well, obviously, Hitler did not do good things, and Hitler was arguably the worst person that has ever walked this earth. The president denies saying this, and ultimately this is a choice for the American people. The American people will have a chance to weigh in 13 days and make their decision about who the next president of the United States is. Obviously, I would condemn any rhetoric along those lines, but ultimately this is the choice of the American people to make this November. And we have a lot of challenges facing this country, from the affordability crisis to the migrant crisis and the crisis at our southern border to the international crises around the globe. And I think the American people will make a choice based on who is best poised to address these challenges as we move forward. Mr. Lawler, thank you. Mr. Jones, your reaction?
Look, what you just heard was obfuscation from Mike Lawler, who is supporting Donald Trump for the third consecutive presidential election cycle, despite the fact that Donald Trump tried to violently overturn the last free and fair presidential election. Donald Trump is a convicted felon, and John Kelly, his longest-serving chief of staff, is not the first person to say that Donald Trump has praised Hitler. And by the way, as John Kelly calls Donald Trump a fascist, so too did his former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. So this is a pattern. We've all seen Donald Trump's authoritarian behavior play out on television at his rallies, and obviously, as I mentioned, in what happened on January 6th. And I think it's disqualifying that Mike Lawler continues to support this guy, and of course would be a reliable vote for his dangerous Project 2025 agenda, were he to remain in Congress as part of an extreme MAGA Republican majority next January. We have to make the right choice in the 17th Congressional District. That starts with flipping this House seat.
So, Mr. Jones, since the former president has threatened to use the military and the Department of Justice to go after people he calls disloyal, which could even mean judges or people who are nonpartisan election officials, would you try to stop him or vote for him to be impeached?
Well, look, I have in the past voted to impeach Donald Trump for trying to overturn the last presidential election, for doing so in a very violent way at that. And for being unrepentant about it. I'm going to reserve on the question of hypotheticals. Presidents should not be impeached until such time as they commit impeachable offenses. And I think it would be irresponsible for me to suggest that I would impeach him, hypothetically speaking. Here's the thing. We have to make sure that Donald Trump's dangerous Project 2025 agenda, a national abortion ban, cuts to Social Security and Medicare, the elimination of the Department of Education, which, among other things, investigates acts of anti-Semitism on college campuses. All of these dangerous policies, that's what people in the lower Hudson Valley are thinking about and caring about. They care less about impeachable offenses, as important as those are.
Mr. Lawler, would you stop President Trump from using the military or the Department of Justice to go after people who are disloyal, and would you consider impeaching him?
Look, first of all, I will always uphold the Constitution of the United States. And of course, I would push back against any effort to go after political opponents. But that's the problem we're dealing with right now in this country. People do not have faith and confidence in our systems. I have said repeatedly, Joe Biden won the 2020 election. What happened on January 6th was wrong. And should not happen again. But ultimately, this is a choice for the American people. The only person on the stage who is extreme is Mondaire Jones. He supported defunding the police. He supported cashless bail. He called all cops racist and white supremacists. He called ICE agents terrorists. He wanted to defund ICE. He wanted open borders. He wanted to provide asylum to criminal aliens. He wanted cop killers the right to vote from prison. It's why AOC, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren supported him. At the end of the day, if it talks like a socialist, votes like a socialist, folks, it's a socialist.
Mr. Mondaire Jones, would you care to respond to that?
Sure. If it talks
30 seconds.
If it talks like a fascist and supports a fascist for president of the United States for the third consecutive presidential election, then it's a mini fascist. But here's the thing. The fact is, I never voted to cut funding for law enforcement. I always voted for record levels of police funding. It's Mike Lawler who has voted on 3 different occasions to cut funding for law enforcement. I never voted to cut funding for our border. I voted for record levels of border security, and he is blocking, as we have this conversation, bipartisan border security legislation endorsed by the conservative Border Patrol Union that would hire more Border Patrol agents, hire more judges to adjudicate claims of asylum, and give the president new authorities to shut down the border.
See, again, okay. This is the fundamental problem. Mondaire Jones was the 3rd most progressive member of Congress. He rated 381st in terms of bipartisanship. I've rated 4th. He has no ability to work across the aisle. He's called every Republican part of a fascist movement in this country. And he says he supports the police, and yet he supported legislation to repeal qualified immunity for every police officer in this nation. He supported the repeal of 50A here in New York. In his own words, he said we need to end mass incarceration and defund the police. These are your words, your actions, not mine.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to move on to something you just touched on, which is immigration. Our Tony Aiello covers the district. He asked voters what they think. Here's some of what they had to say, and this one is on immigration. Let's listen.
I would like to know what you would do to stop the illegal immigration into this country because it is affecting everybody around us.
What are they going to do about the border?
Mr. Lawler, you and other Republicans have complained about the nation's immigration policy under the current administration, yet Republicans refuse to vote for a bipartisan solution because former President Trump wanted the border to be a campaign issue. Was this the right thing to do for the country? And how can you criticize a border policy that you actually had a chance to do something about, sir?
Maurice, that's a false pretense. First of all, this crisis was created by Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Mondaire Jones. During the first 2 years of this administration, they've reversed 94 executive orders and reinstituted the Obama-era policy of catch and release. That's what allowed over 10.5 million migrants to come into this country, most of them illegally, 90% released into the country. It is costing New York State billions of dollars because of their disastrous sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies. I supported H.R. 2, the strongest border security measure that has ever passed the House. We passed it in May of 2023. Chuck Schumer and the White House refused to move on it. The bipartisan border security package that, by the way, didn't have bipartisan votes in support of it. In fact, 6 Democrats voted against it. Did nothing to actually solve the crisis. That's why it didn't pass. It would have instituted catch and release into law. It would not have reinstated Remain in Mexico. It would have done nothing to actually build border wall, and it would have done nothing to actually start deporting criminal aliens, which, by the way, Mondaire Jones, when a member of Congress, tried to prevent the deportation of criminals.
So you're saying not voting for it was the right thing to do for the country?
It never reached the House, Maurice. It failed in the Senate. So how could I vote on it,
okay.
Number one? Number two, again, the actual bill language was fundamentally wrong. It would have enshrined into law catch and release, which is what created this mess in the first place.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, on one hand, he's saying it never got to him, and then on the other hand, he's explaining why he would never have voted for it in the first place. Look, here's the thing. It is well established, well reported. In fact, Senator Langford of Oklahoma has very publicly talked about this. He co-authored this legislation. Langford is one of the most conservative senators there is. He, at the direction of Donald Trump, joined by Mike Johnson and Mike Lawler, refused to pursue this legislation because Donald Trump woke up one day and said he wants to use it as a campaign issue in the fall. That's not solutions-oriented leadership. This is the most bipartisan thing that one could do in Congress right now.
It had no bipartisan votes.
Securing the border is one of the most bipartisan things that one could do. And this guy, Mike Lawler, who pretends to be a moderate on television, but who votes just like the extreme MAGA Republicans, is blocking this legislation. He said it would be dead on arrival. And so, of course, between that and at the direction of Donald Trump, people in the Senate doing the same thing, abandoning this legislation, something that was going to sail into law, all of a sudden got torpedoed because they don't want to do the right thing. They like to play politics rather than secure our southern border.
One more rebuttal here.
Every time he opens his mouth, he's straight up lying. The bottom line here is this. During his 2 years in Congress, the border crisis exploded. He said nothing about it. He didn't offer any solutions. He didn't offer any plan to secure the border, to build border wall, to institute remain in Mexico. No, in fact, he called ICE agents terrorists. He went after former Congresswoman Nita Lowey for supporting ICE. He wanted to defund ICE. So this is not someone who has ever been serious about securing our border. It absolutely is true, and we have the receipts. This is not somebody who has ever been serious about securing the border. His disastrous policies that he has supported has created this mess.
Thank you both.
Okay, we're going to have to move on now. Mr. Lawler, I'd like to talk to you about a topic you have been familiar with. You've said that you helped push Governor Hochul to pause congestion pricing, but according to a report that is out today by the state controller, there's an urgent need for money for the MTA. The controller said that the MTA is going to have a deficit of about $600 million over the next few years. I'm wondering, would you lead a fight in Washington to secure federal funds for the MTA to try to help them out of their problems?
Yes, of course, but it requires better management of the MTA. It is the most bloated, mismanaged authority in the entire country. Everybody there should be fired at the very top. The bottom line is this. Congestion pricing is nothing more than a money grab. It is a scam. Marcia, it is a scam.
But here's the question. If President Trump, but if President Trump was, if Trump was president, would you have difficulty getting any federal money for the MTA because there seems to be a lack of affection for the MTA on the part of former President Trump?
No, look, the bottom line here is congestion pricing is a scam. It is nothing more than a money grab that the MTA put in place to try and raise $1 billion of revenue so that it could borrow $15 billion to run its mismanaged operations. You know what they could start with to get funds? Actually enforcing the fare. They lose $700 million a year to fare jumpers who refuse to pay to ride the subway system. Yes, I would fight to get more funds, but there needs to be better management, and New York State needs to actually enforce the law and ensure that those that ride the MTA actually pay to ride it.
Mr. Jones, would you lead a fight in Washington for more money for the MTA?
Of course I would lead a fight in Washington for more money for the MTA, even as my opponent has already gone on the record voting against transportation funding. Here's the thing. I think the first ad that I saw in this campaign by Mike Lawler was him taking credit for Kathy Hochul pausing congestion pricing, which is obviously an issue that is dealt with at the state level. He doesn't want to talk about his record in Congress at the federal level. I mean, this is a guy who was voted on 10 different occasions to restrict access to abortion, on 19 different occasions and counting against protecting Social Security and Medicare. In fact, on September 29th...
You cannot provide one single vote.
Oh, I would love to.
You cannot provide
If you stop talking, I can answer the question.
Oh,
on September 29th, 2023, for example, among other examples, Mike Lawler voted for a budget that would have reduced access to Social Security. It would have caused the Social Security Administration to have closed 200, I'm talking, Mike, to close 240 offices or otherwise cut their hours. This is one of dozens of votes, as I mentioned. Here's the thing. He also wants to raise the age of retirement, which is a cut to the benefits of seniors in our Congressional District.
Mr. Jones,
seniors like my grandmother who had to work past the age of retirement just to pay for the high cost of living in the lower Hudson Valley because of him.
Look, I introduced legislation in the state legislature to repeal congestion pricing. As a member of Congress, I worked with Democrat Josh Gottheimer to block congestion pricing from taking effect. When Mondaire Jones up and left our district and ran down for Congress in Brooklyn, you know what he said? His personal policy preference is for congestion pricing. You cannot believe one thing that comes out of his mouth because he absolutely has tried to reverse every single policy He supported in 2020 because he knows it is not popular in our district today. But the fact is, he has supported these policies, and they are a disaster for taxpayers and commuters in New York.
One more.
Yeah, so much like his mentor and the guy he's supporting for president of the United States for the third consecutive time, Mike Lawler lies effortlessly, without reservation, without hesitation, without remorse. Even the clip that he points to as evidence of my support for unfettered congestion pricing is taken out of context, because in that same debate, if he were to air that portion of it, you would see that I call for an exemption for the lower Hudson Valley, which is a community that meets my threshold of lacking adequate public transportation. I grew up in Rockland County. I know what it's like not to have a one-seat ride.
I'm sorry, when you were running for Congress in Brooklyn, you called for an exemption for the lower Hudson Valley?
You're melting down right now, interrupting me, Congress.
Gentlemen, we're going to move on. You're out of time, sir. Thank you. Another question here from someone who lives in the district. Let's listen.
I'm really concerned about the misinformation that's going around about Proposition 1. It's about people's equal rights and protecting their rights.
So Proposition 1, it's on the New York State ballot. It's also known as the Equal Rights Amendment. It's going to enshrine the right to abortion in the New York Constitution. As a New York resident, will you vote for it, Mr. Jones?
I absolutely will vote for Proposition 1, because we need to do what we can here in the state of New York to enshrine protections for women's basic freedom to make their own health care decisions. You know, since Mike Lawler and Donald Trump got their way and the right to an abortion was overturned after being constitutionally recognized for 50 years, we have seen abortion bans in nearly half the states in America go into place. And this isn't something that just happens outside of the state of New York. You know, speak to Beth in Nyack, who has to cross off the names of colleges and universities on a list of where her daughter can even apply to college based on whether those states have an abortion ban. Mike Lawler is rabidly anti-choice. He always votes to restrict access to abortion. He's done it on at least 10 different occasions and counting. He told the Journal News, our flagship publication, that he'd like to see nearly all abortions in New York eliminated. And he would absolutely be a reliable vote for a national abortion ban. He is sincerely extreme on this subject, and he has disdain for women and their ability to make their own health care decisions.
The only one who has disdain for women is you. You called the first female governor of the state of New York the same word as what is referred to as a female dog. So don't lecture anybody about respect for women. You're a disgrace. The bottom line here is this. Proposition 1 is way more expansive than the issue of abortion. Abortion rights are codified into law in New York. They are not changing. I am not seeking to change them. I've been very clear. I will not support a federal ban on abortion at any point. So he continues to lie. The Wall Street Journal called it flat out false.
Oh, with the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal says it must be true, right?
Proposition, well, it is. And if you actually read the Wall Street Journal, maybe you'd understand economics. This proposition goes well beyond the issue of abortion. It would take away parental rights. It would allow non-citizens the ability to vote and provide them with certain rights and benefits in this state, which, as we've seen in New York, is a complete disaster as the state spends billions of dollars on illegal immigrants. And it would allow boys, biological boys, to play in girls' sports. Period.
Thank you.
It is wrong, and I will not support it.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to move on here. Mr. Lawler, the day after Israel killed Yahya Sinwar, the man who plotted that attack on October 7th that included Americans taken hostage, you introduced a bill that would deny American aid to nations that take Americans hostage or otherwise detain them. Could this make it more difficult to end the war in Gaza? Because clearly American aid would be part of the peace package for the Palestinians.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Hamas is who is responsible for this situation in Gaza. Hamas is a terrorist organization that killed innocent Israelis and Americans on October 7th. They took hundreds of Israelis and Americans hostage. There are still 7 Americans remaining hostage, 4 presumed living, 3 deceased. The fastest way for a ceasefire to occur, the fastest way for this conflict to come to an end, is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. If they are holding our American citizens hostage, why would we ever provide American taxpayer money to provide relief? If and until they release our hostages, we're not doing that, and we shouldn't. I have been a staunch supporter of Israel. I have been staunch in my defense of them, passing legislation, including the Special Envoy for the Abraham Accords, to ensure that Arab-majority nations normalize relations with Israel. Then and only then can there be peace in the Middle East. But so long as other nations funded by Iran want to destroy the state of Israel, then it is very difficult to actually get the peace that you are talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
October 7th was the worst assault on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. I continue in my record of strongly defending Israel's right to exist and to defend itself against terror threats, whether they emanate from Hamas, a terrorist organization that must be defeated and that still has over 100 hostages, including American hostages, or Hezbollah. Look, Sinwar had to be eliminated. This is a terrorist organization that we're talking about when we talk about Hezbollah. And in Congress, I was proud to have a record of voting for every single appropriations bill containing security assistance and other aid to Israel, including standalone supplemental appropriations bills for the purpose of replenishing Iron Dome. I've been to an Iron Dome facility myself in Sderot on the border of Gaza. I understand how critically important that program is. We have to continue to stand with Israel, while, of course, making sure that we minimize the loss of innocent lives in Gaza and finally get to a place where once Hamas is defeated, we arrive at a two-state solution that allows both Israelis and Palestinians to live in dignity.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Do you support your supporters, the SEIU's plea for an arms embargo against Israel? Do you support that?
I absolutely do not support.
So you reject that?
I absolutely do not
Would you denounce their statement right now?
Can I answer your question?
Would you denounce their statement?
Congressman, can I answer your question?
I asked you a question.
Are you grandstanding? Are you going to keep interrupting me? Because it's actually a fairly simple question.
You voted four times You voted four times against Iron Dome.
So we can move on, please.
You voted 4 times against Iron Dome.
His consultants are telling him to talk over me for the sake of scoring cheap and fraudulent political points.
You voted 4 times against Iron Dome, and your supporters.
That is not true. And it's actually one of the more despicable lies that you.
Guys, we're going to move on.
We're going to have to move on.
We're going to move on.
Gentlemen.
Including the SEIU. Will you denounce the SEIU?
We're going to move on.
Gentlemen, we're going to move on.
One of the more despicable lies that you've heard in this campaign.
Mr. Jones, we're going to move on. We're going to move on now.
You voted 4 times.
We're going to move on now. And the next question is to you, Mr. Jones. In an early position paper, you favored a two-state solution, a return to pre-1967 borders, which could affect Israeli settlements. You also called for Jerusalem to be the capital of both Israel and the Palestinian state. Do you still believe that? And what's your solution to the Mideast crisis? You have a minute, and let's try to stay to the minute.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Listen, I stand with Israelis and Palestinians who want to see a lasting peace and security in the region. That includes a two-state solution. Part of that has to involve some kind of land swap. That is negotiated in the form of diplomacy, but you know what can't happen?
So are you saying that some of the settlements are going to have to be dismantled?
In the West Bank?
Yes.
Settlement expansion under Bibi Netanyahu has been inappropriate. Yes, if that's the question that's being asked of me.
Well, the question is,
but you previously said 1967. Is that what you want to go back to, before 1967?
Listen, there has to be a negotiated agreement between Israelis and Palestinians that arrives at a two-state solution, one that allows Israelis to live in peace and in security and the right to their own Jewish homeland, and Palestinians to live in dignity.
And is that the pre-1967 borders?
Look, that's going to be subject to negotiation between Israelis and Palestinians. There is a role for the United States to play.
Mr. Lawler?
I'm baffled, truly. You just said you are a staunch supporter of Israel, and yet you are calling for a negotiated settlement and land swaps? Are you out of your mind? Look,
how do you think you arrive? What is your two-state solution look like?
Iran, the greatest state sponsor of terror. Well, the two-state solution starts with Arab-majority nations recognizing Israel's right to exist and normalizing relations.
I agree.
Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. They continue to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Palestinian Authority.
You were telling me things I know.
Yeah, that's great, but clearly you don't understand it.
No.
The Palestinian Authority, continues to do pay to slay. They pay Palestinians to go kill Jews. And you're talking about land swaps and that Israel needs to acquiesce to go back to 1967
That is not what I'm saying.
Yes, it is.
It's not what I'm saying.
Yes, it is.
Can I rebut this?
We'll rebuttal and we're going to move on right after this.
I so appreciate this.
You only have 30 seconds.
This is where he mischaracterizes my record, tells me things that I already know, even as he understands I've been a staunch supporter of Israel's right to exist and to defend itself. How do you think you arrive at a two-state solution if not some kind of negotiated agreement between Palestinians and Israelis. Nothing about that undermines the safety and security of the Jewish people in Israel.
Okay.
And he is mischaracterizing my record and my statements.
The only way for a two-state solution to work is for Arab-majority nations to normalize relations with Israel, starting with Saudi Arabia. Then, and only then, can there be a two-state solution. But you're talking about land swaps and going back to pre-1967 lines. Everybody just watched this. Your entire argument that you support Israel just blew up in your face.
No, it didn't.
Gentlemen, we have to move on. Maurice?
All right, guys, thank you. Mr. Lawler, when it comes to the photo of you wearing dark makeup to look like Michael Jackson, you've defended yourself by saying you're a big fan of his, and you meant it as a tribute. Are you telling us that in 2006, you had no idea that blackface has a long history as a symbol of hate?
Well, obviously, I understand that blackface has a long history of symbol of hate, and minstrel shows were done to demean, make fun of, besmirch Black Americans. And that's absolutely not what I was doing in 2006 when I dressed up in a Halloween dance contest as a sophomore at Manhattan College. I understand why people are offended, and I apologize for that. And obviously today, that's not something I would do. But Van Jones, one of his own supporters, went on CNN that night and said, this is not blackface. This is not historical minstrel shows meant to degrade Black Americans, and it's a distraction from the real issues impacting Black Americans, from the affordability crisis to public safety to the migrant crisis and the impact that has on our economy and our workforce. So for me, I understand why people are upset about it. I apologize for it. But no, that was not done as an effort to demean or make fun of. Michael Jackson was my musical idol. People know that about me. They've known that for a very long time. And still today, an Andy Warhol painting of Michael Jackson hangs in my office.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, anything on
that was the most incoherent, internally inconsistent non-apology I've heard. Look, on one hand, he says he's sorry, but then he says it wasn't really blackface because Van Jones is saying it's not blackface. Here's the thing. This is part of a pattern. As obvious as it was in 2006 that blackface was deeply offensive, it has been reported by Politico that on 2 different occasions in recent weeks, he has failed the test of leadership when it comes to race. Okay, he hosted an event where someone used the N-word. He didn't push back on that, didn't even acknowledge that it was used in his presence. He did an interview where the host said there's no such thing as white supremacy, but there is such thing as black supremacy. He didn't push back on that. He didn't do the NAACP candidates forum. One of the things that the Spring Valley and Nyack branches of the NAACP have criticized as being an aberration among any candidate running for Congress of the past several decades. It is really important that we have a member of Congress representing the 17th Congressional District who's committed to representing our beautiful diversity that we see in our district, regardless
of... Your time is up, and now we're going to move to another question.
Mr. Lawler needs a second to respond to that. No, you're good? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jones, when you first ran for Congress, you ran as a progressive. Then you moved to Brooklyn, and some say you ran as even more progressive. Now you're running in the 17th District as a moderate. Which is it? Which Mondaire Jones will represent the voters in Washington if you win? Will the real Mondaire Jones please stand up?
Yeah, I would push back on that characterization. It sounds like something right out of a Fox News playbook. Here's the thing. When redistricting resulted in a disastrous process that impacted the 17th Congressional District, I was proud to continue to run as my authentic self. Marcia, can I answer your question?
But you're changing your positions.
Oh, what positions have I changed?
Marcia, I agree. He hasn't changed his positions. He still is that same radical socialist.
Marcia, you know, he falsely accuses me of wanting to defund the police, but when I was in Congress, I voted for record levels of police funding and never, not once, voted to reduce law enforcement funding. He tries to, in the 11th hour, suggest that somehow my support for Israel is not the ironclad support that has existed throughout my tenure in Congress and my existence in public life. And yet, when I first ran for Congress in 2020, I was pro-Israel. So what are these changes that people are saying occurred after my time in Congress? I always stood up for law enforcement. I voted for record levels of border security. This is the guy blocking the border security legislation. I would just ask that members of the press bring more nuance to this conversation.
Mr. Lawler,
I agree with Mondaire Jones. He hasn't changed his positions. He still supports defunding the police. He still supports cashless bail. He called himself a socialist.
That's not true, Mike.
He voted to increase spending by $5 trillion. He was endorsed by AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. He supported Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential primary.
That's not true either, Mike.
Yes, it is.
I never endorsed that.
Joe Biden wasn't progressive enough.
I never endorsed.
At the end of the day, Mondaire Jones is a radical. He called all cops racist and white supremacists. He called ICE agents terrorists.
Okay,
he wanted to allow cop killers and rapists the right to vote from prison.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to move on.
Bottom line is, I agree with Mondaire Jones. He has not changed his positions at all. And in fact, last week in an interview with Brian Lawler, he said, "Show me any position I've changed." I agree. You haven't.
In Congress, I was a pragmatist, and I stood up to the extremes, whether it was my support for law enforcement, my support for border security, including record levels of appropriations money to secure our border, and any of the other nonsense that he is talking about, including things that he's taking out of context from before I was ever elected to Congress in the first place. I never called all cops racist.
Yes, you did.
I never called ICE agents terrorists.
Yes, you did.
But here's the thing. You're gonna hear lies from him throughout the evening, as I mentioned earlier. He lies just like his mentor, Donald Trump. And he's doing it to hold on to power so that he's in place next January to vote for Donald Trump's dangerous Project 2025 agenda.
Mr. Jones, I wanted to go to, we've heard from voters about concerns regarding the economy and specifically about Social Security and Medicare. Let's listen to what they had to say.
You are concerned about pocketbook issues for seniors.
Correct. What can you do to assure me that Social Security and Medicare, first of all, will not disappear and that they will be funded appropriately?
Now, Mr. Jones, since Social Security and Medicare are scheduled to run out of money in 2036, and since the money coming in from payroll and other taxes would only produce about 77% of the funds that would be needed, what should we do?
Yeah.
Should we cut benefits by 23%?
No.
Should we raise more taxes? Should we change the retirement age? What would be your solution for making sure that people get Medicaid, or would you want to end it altogether? I mean, Social Security and Medicaid.
Seniors deserve to retire in dignity. Lower Hudson Valley residents are wondering whether they're going to be able to retire with benefits that they earned into a Social Security trust, for example, that they spent their lives paying into.
So what should be the solution to save it?
I'm answering. I get 1 minute, don't I?
You do.
Okay. And so my record and my position in this race is that of asking people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, my opponent's biggest backer in this congressional race, to pay more, to pay their fair share in taxes so that American seniors can retire in dignity. My opponent has an abysmal record on this. My opponent, Mike Lawler, supports raising the age of retirement. That's a cut to hard-earned benefits for people in the lower Hudson Valley. It is despicable, and it shows how out of touch he is. And it's why I say you can't keep him in Congress, because with Mike Johnson at the helm, the speaker he said he proudly voted for, who has said he wants cuts to Social Security and Medicare, and Donald Trump poised to return to the White House, you are going to see those cuts that Mike Lawler supports, including raising the age of retirement. That would be devastating for us.
Mr. Lawler, how about you? What's your solution for saving Social Security and Medicare?
First of all, there have been 0 votes in this Congress to cut Social Security and Medicare, and in fact, the opposite. At every turn, we have protected Social Security and Medicare from any cuts. But you know what the biggest cut facing Social Security is?
But Mr. Lawler,
excuse me, the cost of inflation. That is the biggest cut facing Social Security. The cost of groceries, the cost of utilities, the cost of housing. Our seniors are being crushed under the weight of these rising costs. That is a result of Mondaire Jones' disastrous policies. Now, I understand firsthand the impact of Social Security. When my dad died from cancer 11 years ago, he was relying on Social Security disability after paying into that system for years. My grandparents lived on Social Security and Medicare. They relied on those programs. I have been very clear. I will not cut those programs. Yes, we have to address this challenge in a bipartisan way. Both programs are going to go broke in the next 10 years. Mondaire Jones can demagogue all he wants, but this requires a bipartisan solution. And he is not someone who is capable of doing that. He has proven that over and over again. He rated 381st in bipartisanship. I've rated 4th. I have never voted to cut Social Security, and I will not.
Thank you. 15 seconds and we have to
Mike
move on.
Lawler has voted on 19 different occasions and counting against protecting Social Security and Medicare.
That is a straight
He just refused to disavow his position supporting raising the age of retirement, so we got him dead to rights on that. But it's not the first time that he's had to not disavow something that's very clearly stated by him, which is that he wants to raise the age of retirement. It's despicable, it's out of touch, and seniors in the lower Hudson Valley cannot afford him in Congress in January.
We're going to move on. We're going to move on here, guys. Another concern we heard from the voters has to do with the rising cost of housing. Let's listen.
How would Congress be able to help with housing affordability within New York State?
Some data here. Across the state, home prices have increased 39% over the last 4 years. Many young people feel that home ownership is out of their reach. Two parts here. What would you do to make housing more affordable in the district? And how old were you when you bought your first home?
Mr. Lawler. Thank you. I was 28 years old when I bought my first home. Housing affordability is a major crisis. We live in the highest taxed counties in America, in Rockland, Westchester, Putnam counties. I have made raising the cap on SALT my top priority because obviously tax relief is critically important for property homeowners. The bottom line here is this. Under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, housing costs have risen dramatically. The average mortgage cost is up over $1,000 a month in Rockland and Westchester counties, up over $800 a month in Putnam and Dutchess counties. I just rolled out a housing plan last week, 209 pages, 39 different provisions to address housing affordability, including workforce housing, affordable housing, reducing the barriers and cost of construction, dealing with the challenges pertaining to HUD and their administration of programs, rent control laws, which are crushing New York City's housing stock here, 50,000 vacant units because of that, increasing the low-income housing tax credit.
Thank you.
So there's a lot we can do and should do from a federal level to incentivize the development of housing while respecting local control of zoning.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, it was 2017 when I bought my first condo. I don't know how old I was at the time off the top of my head. But here's the thing. We have to do something about the housing affordability crisis in the lower Hudson Valley. I know this personally. I grew up housing insecure. In Section 8 housing, and we needed food stamps still to get by. And my mom had to work multiple jobs just to be able to provide for our family. One of the things we need to do is fully restore the state and local tax deduction, which has been capped at $10,000, crushing middle-class households in the lower Hudson Valley. Since Mike Lawler and Donald Trump got their way, he got his president elected. Donald Trump returned the favor with the support of Republican majorities in the House and in the Senate at capping that deduction at $10,000. Now he wants to say he's a champion for fully restoring the SALT deduction. It's why I say there's not a problem he claims to be trying to solve that he's not responsible in some way, shape, or form for helping to create in the first place.
Okay, we're going to move on here, guys.
Well, I'd like to respond.
10 seconds.
Yeah, the problem here is this is the guy that's now advocating for the largest tax increase in American history by allowing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to fully expire and wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 28%.
So you would renew the cap of $10,000?
No, I wouldn't renew the cap.
Because that was part of the December 2017 tax cuts.
I said
that you're saying you want to renew.
You want them to fully expire. I've been very clear that the bottom line is we need to lift the cap on SALT. You want to provide the largest tax increase in American history. It's pathetic.
Thank you both. We're going to move on here. Mr. Lawler, what's your message to the thousands of Haitian Americans who live and work in the district and feel like targets of hate now? And they now fear for their safety after former President Trump repeated that false information we're all now familiar with about Haitians eating dogs and cats in Ohio.
Look, I was the first Republican to speak out against those statements. I am proud to represent the second largest Haitian diaspora per capita. I have worked tirelessly to support our Haitian community, to work with them on issues impacting the community locally, as well as addressing the challenges on the ground in Haiti. 40% of the Haitian people live in the United States. They are part of this community, part of this country. They contribute greatly to our economy. And they are welcome here.
What are you telling specifically about this situation?
I've been very clear that those comments were wrong. I have gone into the Haitian community numerous times over the last many weeks, and we continue to work closely with leaders within the Haitian community. I'm proud of the fact that 2 staff members of mine are Haitian, speak Creole, work tirelessly to address the challenges of our constituents, and I will continue to do that.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah. Mike Lawler still refuses to call out Donald Trump and J.D. Vance by name when it comes to the despicable lie that Haitian people somehow are eating cats and dogs. It's a despicable lie that caused over 33 different bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio, and that caused classes to have to be canceled on multiple occasions. I rallied with the Haitian community in my hometown of the village of Spring Valley 2 Sundays ago, and people are hurting. People are hurting. I mean, for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to put a target on their backs, and for their member of Congress to be so cowardly, to be so afraid of Donald Trump, as he always has been, to call him out by name, and instead say that everyone just needs to tone down the rhetoric, as though the rhetoric isn't coming from Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and other Republican leaders, is not only dishonest, it's despicable and it's disqualifying. And it's yet another piece of evidence that he should not be in Congress next January.
Mr. Jones, let's move on. Do you think we should change the labor laws so that migrants have a faster route to getting work papers? Last year, for example, Governor Hochul said the state identified more than 18,000 job openings with nearly 400 employers willing to hire migrants. So why not help asylum seekers, get these jobs?
Well, look, let's be very clear that if claims of asylum are judged to be invalid, those people are not legally here. Let me start by laying that foundation. While people are here waiting for their asylum claims to be adjudicated, it seems to me that it makes sense for people to be contributing and to avoid the public coffers going towards paying for their cost of living, that they would be paying for their own cost of living by taking on jobs. So do I think that the red tape needs to be improved or otherwise, facilitated in terms of migrants being able to work as they wait for their claims to be adjudicated? Sure. And that's what employers, including small business owners, are also saying.
Mr. Lawler.
What you didn't hear there is that he doesn't disagree with the fact that they shouldn't be here in the first place. The bottom line is the asylum and parole process needs to be reformed. People should be applying for asylum in their country of origin or the next closest country of safe passage. They should not be pouring across the border, being detained under catch and release, processed, and then released into the United States. 90% of the 10.5 million people have been released into the United States. This is why we're dealing with this crisis. So just incentivizing more behavior like that by giving work authorizations and speeding up the process for work authorization while not reforming the asylum and parole process is a disaster. The asylum and parole process is taking upwards of 2 to 3 years, and in some cases 10 years to be heard. 70% of those cases are rejected. So why not deal with this on the front end, hear these cases expeditiously within 60 days, and if somebody has a valid, legitimate asylum or parole claim, then yes, give them work authorization to be here. But don't continue to allow this massive influx and think that it's okay.
All right, thank you both. Mr. Lawler, X, which is formerly known as Twitter, wants users to agree to let their posts be used to develop AI technology. How do you feel about this? Will you agree to let your posts be used to do this kind of thing? And what kind of role should the government be playing in regulating AI?
No, I don't like that idea and wouldn't support it. Look, AI obviously is in its nascent stages in many respects. It's becoming more readily available to consumers. I think, obviously, as we have always been as a country, we want to be on the forefront of technology and innovation. But I do think there needs to be safeguards. I am concerned about how AI can be used with respect to our financial markets, how it can be used by foreign bad actors to manipulate our youth, as we see, for instance, through the application TikTok. I am concerned about how foreign bad actors can use it to influence our elections. So I think we need to be cautious with respect to AI. I think, obviously, we want to be at the forefront of AI, of quantum computing, but there does need to be safeguards. And I think we need to be very careful about using individual data to create algorithms.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, look, you can't trust what he says on this because he's getting most of his money from Elon Musk when it comes to Republican super PAC expenditures by an individual. Here's the thing. When I was in Congress on the Antitrust Committee, I found myself oftentimes on the side of Republicans standing up to the largest tech companies in America. We're talking Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And it put me at odds sometimes with my Silicon Valley Democratic colleagues. This is the kind of bipartisanship that has been a hallmark of my tenure in Congress. It's why I was proud to help pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill into law, to help pass the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. The CHIPS and Science Act I helped pass into law was done on a bipartisan basis. So, too, was the Respect for Marriage Act. You'll never hear him talk about this because he lies and says that he's more bipartisan than me. Let me tell you something. I can actually point to things I've delivered for the Lower Hudson Valley. He'll sign on to a bill that never becomes law. But the fact is, I should not be judged negatively because of my success in capping the cost of insulin and other prescription drugs for seniors just because not a single Republican voted for it.
I'm sorry. I've passed 10 bills through the House, 5 of which were signed into law by President Biden. You passed 1 bill to rename a post office. Give me a break, dude.
Okay.
You have continually lied.
I think no one is at risk of believing that you have been part of a productive Congress. No one is at risk of you believing that you have been part of a productive Congress. In fact, it's been the least productive Congress since the Civil War.
Spending by $2.1 trillion and capping federal spending by 1% going forward to clean up the very mess that you created.
Member of Congress from the 17th District.
I'm the most unaccomplished.
We're going to move on. Thank you both. Thank you both.
Your only accomplishment
our next one here has to do with lithium-ion battery storage farms. They are a big part of New York's green energy goals, as you know. Homeowners near a proposed facility in your district are concerned about their property values as well as safety and fires and so forth. In Congress, how will you balance the urgent need to fight climate change while respecting the rights and concerns of homeowners who live there?
Look, I believe climate change is real. My grandfather was one of the foremost experts on cleaning up the Hudson River as an environmental engineer. I have supported I've supported multiple pieces of legislation, including the Environmental Bond Act, to provide billions of dollars in clean energy projects. I have pushed back against barges up the Hudson, pushed back against the discharge of toxic wastewater into the Hudson River. The problem here is we do not have a coherent energy policy in New York. When you shut down Indian Point, when you block Dan Scammer, the natural gas power plant, and you're requiring people to go on to increase the usage of electricity and all new hookups be electric vehicles mandated. It creates a increased demand on electricity, and so they need battery storage. The problem is they're trying to site a battery storage plant in Somers on the border with Mahopac. The residents are opposed to it. The towns are opposed to it. I'm opposed to it. That is not how you go about addressing the energy crisis facing this state. We have a real challenge here where our energy costs, our utility costs have skyrocketed because of the reckless policies we have seen here in New York.
Did you suggest you wanted Indian Point to be reopened?
I never supported the shutdown of Indian Point. It was foolish. It was 25% of our energy supply for the region. And now, by the way, since Indian Point shut down, New York's energy grid is dirtier. So it was foolish on Governor Cuomo's part to shut it down without any environmental review whatsoever at the behest of his former brother-in-law and riverkeeper, and no plan to replace the energy supply.
Okay, just to be clear, Mr. Jones.
My goodness. I'm so glad that Lower Hudson Valley residents are seeing that their congressman doesn't want to keep them safe. He has now come out, finally, in opposition to the closure of Indian Point. Here's the thing. People have a right to be very concerned about nuclear waste and, in fact, a nuclear reactor being in their vicinity. We've seen this not go well in other contexts throughout the world. I'm proud, and when I was in Congress, to have helped pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in clean, renewable energy than any nation has ever taken in the history of the world. It's going to create millions of good-paying, oftentimes union jobs over the next decade, and it is going to lower the cost of energy. We need to do transitioning to clean, renewable energy in a thoughtful way, in a smart way, in a way that minimizes disruption and any kind of cost increases, and that is a principle that I've always been guided by.
Even Tom DiNapoli, the Democratic controller, is saying the CLCPA is nowhere near meeting the goals. The bottom line here is that the energy policies that have been put in place here in New York State have jacked up the cost of energy. Go look at your utility bills today. It costs more today because we are not producing enough energy. I support renewables, but solar and wind alone are not going to do it. Nuclear power is the cleanest form of power. Natural gas is critical. You talk about good-paying union jobs. Blocking natural gas power plants and killing pipelines actually kills union jobs, and that's why those unions support me.
Thank you. 15 seconds if you need it.
Yeah, I'm proud to be supported by New York's largest labor unions. I'm not sure why he thinks he can lie about that without it being demonstrably false. But here's the thing. There is a real choice between the two of us. And people in the lower Hudson Valley are going to get a decision to decide whether we're going to go in the direction of a Democratic Congress that's going to build on the success of combating climate change.
Mr. Jones, thank you. Thank you.
Or a Republican Congress that doesn't believe in climate change.
You get the next question. Should there be term limits for members of the Supreme Court or a mandatory retirement age?
Yeah, I'm certainly open to the idea of term limits for Supreme Court justices. This Supreme Court, led by far-right Republican extremists, supported by my opponent, Mike Lawler, is on a rampage. Whether it is the Dobbs decision that took away the fundamental right of women to make their own reproductive health care decisions, or decisions that whittle away at LGBTQ+ rights, returning LGBTQ+ individuals like myself to effective second-class citizenship when you look at the decisions allowing companies to discriminate, to deny services to people based on who they love or how they identify. How can you reach any other conclusion than that this Supreme Court has to be regulated and reformed? There's not even a binding code of ethics for the Supreme Court of the United States. And we are going to see, if Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, a man who Mike Lawler supports for the third consecutive time, even more far-right extreme justices added to the Supreme Court. We have to do what we can to restore women's reproductive freedom under federal law, as well as other much-needed reforms, including the Equality Act to protect the LGBTQ+ community.
Mr. Lawler, Supreme Court, should there be term limits? Should there be a mandatory retirement age?
No, I don't support that, and I also don't support what Mondaire Jones does, which is expanding the court. He wants to radicalize the court and bend it to his will. He wants to appoint more Supreme Court justices because he doesn't like the current makeup of the Supreme Court. What that will lead to is a tit for tat. Every time control of Congress changes, we will be expanding the court going forward. That would be a disaster for our court system. It would politicize the court system far beyond whatever he is concerned about at this moment. At the end of the day, if we want to address laws in this country, that is why we have Congress. We have three co-equal branches of government. Congress passes the laws, the president signs it and enforces it. The Supreme Court determines whether or not it is constitutional. Mondaire Jones wants to upend that. Mondaire Jones wants to upend that and expand the court. He wants to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate. So for somebody who talks about upholding democracy, he does not believe in our democracy.
The red light. I think your time is up.
Mr. Jones, 15-second rebuttal.
Yeah, look, did you see the way he just described my concern for the fact that women's reproductive freedom has been taken away? He said whatever it is Mondaire is concerned about, the disdain that he carries, the disdain
that is what
that he carries with him.
You want to expand
every time he votes to restrict
Please
access to women's reproductive freedom is despicable.
Okay.
You can have your personal beliefs, but don't foist those onto other people. Let women make their own reproductive health care decisions.
That's rich, Mondaire.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our final segment here. We've covered a lot of ground. This last bit is called In One Word. We're trying to get answers here in one word, maybe two max, all right? Let's start with you, Mr. Jones. Would you ever vote for a candidate from the other party?
Yes.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
But who? Do you have a person that you could support?
For president or any office?
Any office.
I've supported Lou Falco, our Rockland County Sheriff.
How about you, Mr. Jones? Is there a candidate you could support from another party? Name them.
Yeah, well, look, it's increasingly difficult these days as people bend the knee to MAGA extremism in the Republican Party. But there are candidates for local office who have been endorsed, for example.
This is in one word.
One word.
Oh, well, look, there are candidates for a state Supreme Court judge who have both Republican and Democratic lines.
Mr. Lawler, what's the one thing other than your family you simply can't live without? One word. One word.
Music.
Mr. Jones, what's the one thing you can't live without other than your family?
Other than my family. I do like movies.
All right. Our team did some digging, and they found your senior graduation pictures. Mr. Jones, let me put this picture up right there. What were you thinking at this moment in 2005?
I appreciate it.
One word. One word. What were you thinking?
Going to college.
Going to college. That's 3 words. Mr.
Okay,
Lawler.
fine. College.
There you go.
College.
Mr. Lawler, your graduation picture. Let's put this up. What was going through your mind?
Same thing, college.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Jones, what's one thing your parents were right about?
Parents were right about a lot of things.
Well, pick one.
They would say things like, "You'll understand when you're older." I think the responsibility that one has to give back.
Mr. Lawler, what's one thing your parents were right about?
The very last thing my dad said to me before he died was, "To whom much is given, much is required." He was right about that, and it's something I cherish and carry with me every day in public office.
Mr. Lawler, what's one thing that your parents were wrong about?
Good question. They were right about a lot, honestly. I had really good parents. Love you, Mom.
Mr. Jones, what's one thing your parents were wrong about?
When I was in high school, my parents didn't know I was gay.
Okay.
Mr. Jones, what's your social media of choice?
Instagram.
Mr. Lawler?
X.
Okay.
Mr. Lawler, would you ride in a self-driving taxi with no driver?
No.
No.
Mr. Jones, do you have a secret skill or talent?
I sing a little bit.
Mr. Lawler?
Well, as everybody now knows, I can moonwalk.
Okay.
Okay, so last but not least, Mr. Lawler, do aliens exist?
No.
Mr. Jones, do aliens exist?
No.
All right. I wanted to hear you sing, but I don't think we have time, sir. Thank you.
You got to pay for that.
That is all the time we have.
I'll moonwalk afterward.
We want to thank both your candidates for a really spirited and thorough debate. As a reminder, everyone, early voting in New York begins this Saturday, October 26th, and ends on November the 3rd. Election day itself, November the 5th. That's a Tuesday. The polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. You can find more information and our voter guide online at cbsnewyork.com. Thank you again, the candidates. Thank you so much for joining us at home. For Marcia Kramer and everybody here at CBS New York, I'm Maurice Dubois. We'll see you again tonight on the news at 11 o'clock. Have a good night.